Welcome to week 4 of a series we're calling Uncensored, where we're looking at some of the most provocative, challenging, disorienting statements of Jesus. These statements are recorded in his longest and arguably most famous message called the Sermon on the Mount. And this is a challenging message because it calls us to live as citizens of heaven, seeing God as King, and to live differently in this life because of it. This was a profound sermon for the first listeners, and it has also been super profound for us. See, the first listeners had mixed their faith in God, their national citizenship, their political affiliation, their ethnicity, all into this one big blend, and Jesus was wrecking their world by rearranging and reprioritizing how they viewed themselves, their faith, their nationality, everything. And he's been doing the same thing for us. Since week 1 of the series, we've been challenged to read the 3 chapters that hold the Sermon on the Mount daily. That's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And these chapters have raised so many questions and tensions for us as we deal with the words of Jesus. One of my favorite moments from this series happened one weekend after the message. I had this Vietnam vet, super tough guy with his army hat. He comes walking out in the atrium, comes straight up to me, and he goes, "I don't know what the beep I just heard, but did Jesus really say all that stuff?" And I was like, yeah, he did say all that. And he goes, "Well, Pastor, I'm gonna need your email because I am sure I'm gonna have a lot of questions as I read this every day." I can't tell you how much I loved his posture. I love that he is wrestling with the words of Jesus and what they mean for us today. I love that he is opening up his hands and saying, "Okay, Jesus, maybe somewhere along the lines, I may have missed something. Show me who you really are." I absolutely love that is happening to so many of us as we live in the tension of these verses. We've heard hundreds of stories from you guys doing the same thing, looking at the words of Jesus, the way of life that he calls us into, and asking, what does it mean to really follow Jesus? See, Jesus' 2,000-year-old sermon is calling us, just like its original hearers, to reprioritize and to reevaluate our identity, our citizenship as children of God, followers of Jesus above everything else. To see ourselves as children of God, as citizens of heaven, above our nationality, above our citizenship, above our political leanings, above our ethnic groups, above our pet peeves and perspectives, to say first and foremost, I am a child of God, following God. But to do this is honestly terrifying. It's super scary. It's disorienting, and it's scary and disorienting, and because so many of us have done what I've done at times, where we flip our identity. And see, we inadvertently go and become American Christians, not Christians who happen to live in America. Or we became Republican or Democrat Christians, not Christians who have a certain way that we vote. Or we became insert whatever your personal passion and pet peeve is, Christians, instead of Christians who have a personal passion and pet peeve that they're excited about. See, this sermon given by Jesus is calling us to do a terrifying thing. That is to recognize Jesus as the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and to pledge allegiance to him first and foremost, and then figure out what it means to live as citizens and races and thinkers and voters among one another. This is a hard series, but I really do believe it's a necessary one. And today, we're continuing by looking at one of the hardest passages in it. It's a passage that has been notoriously mishandled and misapplied and misunderstood, but it is a hard passage. But I actually love this passage because it challenges me, challenges us, pushes us. Because Jesus, who is a master teacher, does this masterful job of taking these concepts out of the philosophical, heady realm and making them deeply, deeply personal. So to help us hopefully avoid mishandling or misapplying or misunderstanding this passage, I want us to try to paint a picture of the culture and climate that Jesus is addressing, the people that he's talking to 2,000 years ago. And so 2,000 years ago, there were three major factors that were at play in their culture at the time of Jesus' teaching that we have to understand to see where he's going in this teaching. See, first and foremost, the people that Jesus is talking to is the nation of Israel, and the nation had been invaded and conquered by the Romans. So everywhere you looked, you would see the signs of a Roman army occupying your land, demanding your crops, taking your homes, your services. They could at any moment demand your labor, and you had to comply or be beaten. Either or, your choice. One of the most famous examples of the Romans forcing someone to do this was actually when Jesus was carrying his cross through the city of Jerusalem, headed to his crucifixion, and he collapsed from the blood loss and the beatings that he had occurred. And for those of you who know the story, what did the Roman soldiers who were overseeing his execution do? They grabbed a man off the street and they forced him to carry Jesus' cross. See, we know this guy's name was Simon, but I'm not sure why he was in town. Maybe he came in for groceries. Maybe he came in to visit his mother-in-law, maybe to go to the temple. Who knows? But I would take a really big bet that he did not come into town that day to carry another man's bloody cross. But on that day, at that time, he was forced to. Why? Because the Romans could make him do it. Israel was a people who were powerless to their oppressors' demands. At any moment, they could say, you have to do this, and you simply had to. I mean, this might be super foreign for us to try to grasp what it would be like to live in a culture where the governing power has that much power over us, a power that could dictate something, and we have to do it or be beaten. The second factor that was affecting the people that Jesus was talking to was taxes. Now this one's a little bit more relatable. We understand taxes here, but we may not understand the extreme to which they were taxed. They were super taxed. We understand what it's like to have money, but they had money that they'd worked really, really hard for, desperately needed, and it was demanded and taken away from them, whether they wanted to or not. See, the folks that Jesus was talking to, they lived in a triple taxation system. So they paid a temple tax, so that was collected for the poor. They paid a Herodians tax, which was their local government tax. Then they paid a Romans tax. And some historians, listen to this, some historians said at moments they were taxed up to 90% of their income. And to make matters worse, the Roman tax collectors, they could collect whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, however they wanted, just as long as Rome got whatever they wanted. So these people were getting taken advantage of left and right. And there were a lot of really, really good people spiraling into debt, unable to make it, feeling unable to provide for their families, living paycheck to paycheck, living with the fear that at any moment a collector who's more powerful could put demands on them and just keep taking till you feel like you've lost everything, to the point that you no longer have that financial cushion, but also keep taking till you no longer have dignity or security. Many lived with the feeling of being financially vulnerable in their throat, asking, are we gonna make it this month? Jesus knew these people. He knew this crowd. He knew and experienced first the political stresses, he lived in it. And second, he saw the financial stresses, he was a part of that. But he also had noticed the third factor at play. And that was how all of these stresses became personal stresses and how they got lived out. See, because of these stresses, Jesus knew that this often resulted in people exploding on the people around them, responding and reacting to the insulting and dehumanizing ways, being cruel and mean to one another. See, Jesus, knowing all of this, gives this famous message. So if you're in your rooms, I want you to grab one of our Bibles. And if you're online, make sure you grab your phone, pull it up. But I want us to look at Matthew chapter 5. So seriously, grab the Bible, should be right around the seat. And I want us to look at the section headings along the way leading to where we're gonna be at today. So we're gonna start at Matthew chapter 5 and then go to where we're going today. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, if you're using one of our Bibles, that's page 735, should be at the bottom left of the page. If you're using your own Bible, I ain't got a clue what page number that is. But we're gonna start in Matthew chapter 5. So verse 1, you should see the heading, Sermon on the Mount. We'll flip the page. And then it goes in verse 3, you'll notice that Jesus starts baiting them with the Beatitudes. And I imagine that everyone who's listening to him is going, wait. Blessed are who, when what happens? And then Jesus starts reframing their purpose, and he reminds them to be salt and light. And then he brings their attention to the kingdom of heaven, talking about their relationship to the law. And then he brings up this anger. And of course, they've got anger. They've been talking about this pressurized, volatile situation and culture they're in. And when he starts talking about their anger, they're like, yeah, we get it. And then he starts talking about how that anger has been misused. And he talks about lust. I mean, who hasn't seen an angry person look at something they shouldn't, seeking to control something they couldn't, to conquer something, to find pleasure in something? And then he turns towards their home life towards their words. I mean, and he highlights that every now and then when an angry person goes home, a little bit of that anger spills out in home and bad things happen. And when someone's angry, their words can start to be twisted and manipulated and spun to their advantage. And then we get to verse 38. And this is where things get super, super interesting to me. See, Jesus says in verse 38, he goes, "You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And at this moment, if I was in the crowd, I would be going, yes, someone finally understands me. Jesus, you get it. You get it. You're right. I am super angry, Jesus, and I am hurt, and I do feel like taking advantage of that law. I feel like these evil people around me are ruining my life, and yes, I am angry, and yes, that anger has affected how I love those around me, which makes me only more angry at the people who hurt me to begin with. Jesus, you get it. You got my attention. So now let's do something about it. Jesus, you've reminded us of that amazing law, and I want to enact that law. Jesus, I agree with you. Yes, I call for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this is the moment that if we were in the crowd, our hearts would have been beating, because everyone in the crowd was hoping for a political military leader who would sweep in and rally an army of angry Israelites and storm the capital and drive the evil Romans out who had reclaimed their land. And at this moment, they would have called that man their Messiah. And Jesus knew that he could have whipped this crowd up into a frenzy, and he could have tapped into all of that oppression and hatred and tension and their hope for this military Messiah, and he could have led them back, and he could have started a civil war if he wanted to. And this is why Jesus is a masterful teacher. At the pinnacle of stirring all of their deepest emotions, he leans in and he goes, "You want some retaliation? You want to get back? You want to stick it to the man? But I say," in verse 39, "but I say, do not resist an evil person." Do what, Jesus? Jesus, you just told me to pay back an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, to get revenge, to demand my rights, to make sure that my team was the winning team. What are you talking about, Jesus? I imagine Jesus being like, yeah. All that eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, all that puffing up and pushing back, all of that stuff, that's building someone else's kingdom. But in my kingdom, in my way of life, we do things a little bit different. See, we all know where that road takes us. It takes us to a world full of toothless, blind men. Toothless, blind men who just keep arguing over who's bigger, badder, stronger, more right, more offended, more justified in their behavior and anger. That way of thinking, that's an old story. That's an old story full of old responses. And see, Jesus, he was starting something new. And he's reminding us, as he reminded them, that retaliation and revenge, that only leads to regret. Retaliation and revenge only lead to regret. And Jesus, he's bringing about a new way, a new kingdom, a new way of doing things. And then Jesus starts to paint a picture of his kingdom, of his way of life. And he goes right at those three areas that they're wrapped around, oppressed by, burdened by, overwhelmed by. Listen to what he says to him. He says, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you're sued in court and your shirt is taken, give them your coat as well. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it too. Wait a minute, Jesus, time out. Are you seriously telling me that when I am slapped on the cheek, which is a cultural way of saying when I am insulted, or when I am drugged into the court for my last item because some greedy man wants more of my money, which is totally an injustice, or when the political powers at play force their demands on me and I am totally inconvenienced, I'm supposed to respond, how? Jesus, listen. I thought you cared about my rights, my comfort, my dreams, my business, my wants. Jesus, I like your teachings. I like them a whole lot. That whole turning the water into wine thing, that's kind of cool. Feeding the 5,000, that's really cool too, Jesus. But Jesus, right now, you are sounding crazy. Jesus, do you know how much we're gonna be taken advantage of if we listen to you right now? Jesus, do you know how people treat people? Jesus, do you know how to get ahead in this life? Jesus, this doesn't make sense. This isn't how the world works, Jesus. And this is when Jesus, the masterful teacher, has them exactly where he wants them. And this is when Jesus hooks them and he hooks us and he leans in and gets real close. And he goes, you're right. I know this isn't how this world works. But guess what? I'm not building a kingdom for this world. And I'm not competing against these earthly powers. Jesus, he is building a kingdom. He's bringing a way of life, a way of ruling, a way of loving, a way of responding, his way of doing all of that. Man, Jesus isn't building my idea of a kingdom. And Jesus isn't building your idea of a kingdom. He's building his kingdom. And in his kingdom, when someone insults you, you don't have to insult back. In his kingdom, when you experience an injustice, you respond with grace. In his kingdom, when you are inconvenienced, you serve in return. But Jesus, what am I supposed to do when I'm insulted? I mean, when someone says something that really hurts me, am I supposed to just roll over and be seen as a coward? Depends. Whose kingdom you building? Yours or his? Okay, Jesus, whoa, time out. Jesus, that whole thing about talking about my neighbor, taking an insult, I can deal with that. I don't like him anyway, I'll just avoid him. But do you know how high the taxes are? Do you know how hard it is to make a living? And are you seriously saying that if I am sued, if I'm drugged in the court, if my ex-wife wants more money and my corrupt business partner keeps taking a bigger cut of the profit, or my lazy sister keeps sucking mom and dad dry of my inheritance, I'm supposed to do what? I'm supposed to give to them? I'm supposed to give them more? Depends. Whose kingdom you building? Yours or his? Okay, Jesus, time out. I have rights too. The man, he doesn't have the right to impose upon me. I've been inconvenienced way too many times, Jesus. Jesus, open your eyes. Do you even know what it's like to live under a government who just imposes whatever they wish on you and you demand and have to jump around, act like a monkey to entertain them? Jesus, I thought you cared about this nation, these people. Jesus, I thought you liked what was going on here. And Jesus, in case you forgot, Israel is supposed to be the greatest nation on earth, and we were literally founded by God. What are you saying? Do you say that we're actually supposed to serve the evil people ruining this nation, Jesus? Depends. Whose nation are you building? Whose kingdom are you building? Yours or his? See, Jesus cares a whole lot about you. Cares a whole lot about your feelings, about your stuff, about your comfort. But he cares a whole lot more about his kingdom and his way and his rule. And if we force him to choose between our small kingdoms and his, it's an easy choice. What's amazing about what Jesus did is he didn't call us to do something that he didn't live. See, he goes on that day from that hillside to lay out a new kingdom, a new way of living. Listen to what he says to them about this new kingdom. says in verse 43, you've heard a law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there in that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. A way to translate that last verse, that just kind of brings home the meaning that the original hearers would have heard. It would have been, in a word, what I'm saying is grow up. Your kingdom subjects. Now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Jesus first. Live generously and graciously towards others, the way that God lives towards you. In God's kingdom, generosity and grace wins. God doesn't play favorites with us. He loves us all. He's generous to us all. He's gracious to us all. He gives sun and rain to the good and the bad. He offers grace to the good and the bad. He extends an invitation to his kingdom to the good and the bad. So that insult that you're steaming about and you're looking for an opportunity to repay, that injustice that has put a fire in your bones that's causing you to lash out and fight anytime someone has the audacity to disagree with you, that thing that you've been inconvenienced one time too many over, and if you hear one more time that you got to do such and such, you're going to explode. All those insults and injustices and inconveniences that we're brooding over and saying, well, Jesus, you obviously don't understand how this world works. Jesus is kindly leaning in and saying, yeah, I do. But you don't understand how eternity works. The reason responding this way feels crazy is because we don't see the world how God sees the world, which is actually how the world really is. So we gotta ask a question. Is my view of reality right? Or is Jesus's? But for those who think Jesus is just crazy and wrong and this kingdom life is just too nutty for him, man, just pause for a moment and think about it. You've experienced the old way of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Aren't you all sick and tired of that? Aren't you tired of seeing insults being returned with more insults? Injustices being fought with more injustices? Inconveniences being met with demands for more inconveniences? Aren't we all tired of text messages exploding with more text messages? Of awful court cases around silly things? Of road rage? Road rage just because someone cut you off on accident? I get it. The way of Jesus, it's not natural. But guys, it's better. It's better. I've had this painting for about 17 years now, and it's traveled with Pearl and I all over. We've lived in like 13 different houses or something. It's been with us through it all, and I just love the painting. I love the art. I love the texture. I love the fact that it's an actual painting. But also love it and keep it because of what happened around how I got it. My senior year in college, I was in leadership in a pretty cool way, and I had this team that we worked really, really hard to pull off this huge event, and we pulled out all the stops. And guys, it was an amazing event. But to make this event happen, we had one super difficult staff person who we had to work with. This guy was historically, notoriously difficult to work with. And so I decided I would play man-to-man defense with this person so my team could do what they needed to do. And so the event happened. It was a huge success. We had like 700 students come out, and it was just awesome. But part of the event, part of the experience was actually having a painter paint live this painting on stage. And to do that, we hired a painter to come up out of Atlanta. And so on the morning of the event, he and his super, like, I don't know how his doctor allowed her to get in a car, super pregnant wife, hit crazy traffic coming out of Atlanta. And they came in like on 2 wheels hot, barely making it to set up in time before we had to open the doors for the event. Well, after the event, It was amazing. We're all high-fiving, thinking we just won the Super Bowl. And then all of a sudden, that staff guy comes storming in, and he takes a parking ticket and he shoves it in the face of my super, super, super pregnant guest, shouting, "I don't know who you are. I don't know why you think you can park there, but here's your ticket." Well, at this point, the painter sees this man yelling at his super pregnant wife, totally jumps to his pregnant wife's defense, grabs the ticket, throws it back at the staff member and shouts, "Here's where you can put the ticket." And then the next thing I know, guys, things got nutty because there was shouting and yelling and cussing. And I thought at any moment they're gonna be punching each other. It was awful, awful. And I'm sitting there like a deer in the headlight, like, oh my goodness, what do I do? Well, we finally separated this furious staff person from this furious husband. And that staff person, as he storms off the stage, looks right at me and he shouts, "This is all your fault. You're an awful leader and we're gonna have an awful year because of you." Guys, I'm not proud of what happened next, but I flipped my lid, all right? I flipped. I paid the painter, I took the ticket, I apologized profusely, and I stormed across the college campus to the president's office. And I was looking for blood. I wanted eyes and I wanted teeth and I wanted them to roll that day because I was furious. I was done with the insults. I was done with watching an injustice of this staff person abuse his power. I was done with playing his silly games. I was done with being inconvenienced, and I was demanding his job right then and there. So I stormed into the president's office, to which his sweet little admin's like, "Dr. Gardner's on a phone call." And I'm like, "Not anymore." And I stormed into the president's office, and the president's like, "Let me call you back." Hangs up the phone. And you know that moment when you're so mad, like veins are popping out of places you didn't know you had veins? I had veins exploding from my body, and I looked right at him, and I declared he obviously lacked the necessary anatomy to lead a college and needed to quickly find some or grow some or find someone who had some, because he needed to fire this staff member who had repeatedly offensive behavior. Guys, I was so insulted. I was so over the injustice of power happening. The inconvenience was over the top. And I was demanding an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth that day. And you wanna know what happened? I got kicked out of the president's office. And I later found myself sitting in the dean's office, who was my boss, being like, "I think I screwed that up." And he's like, "You think?" I learned that day there's a right way to be right. There's a right way to respond to insults. There's a right way to respond to injustice. There's a right way to respond to others' inconvenience. But all of that's not why I keep this painting. See, I keep this painting because in my passion, I did exactly to the president what that staff member had done to me. I insulted him. I acted unjustly towards him. I inconvenienced him. And what the president did in return to me changed how I view leadership. That's why I love this painting. See what our president did? He followed Jesus, and he followed the example of Jesus, and he responded in the way that Jesus would have responded. And so when he was insulted, he didn't insult back. In fact, he calmed down, he got his facts, and then he chose how to respond. When injustice hit him, he responded with grace. See, later that day, he got in his car and he drove all over campus looking for me. When he was inconvenienced, he sought a way to serve. Once he found me, he sat me down and we talked about how followers of Jesus respond differently. He didn't shame me, he didn't insult me, he loved me. And he helped me become a better leader. See, he knew that Jesus was inviting us into a different way of life, a different way of leadership, a way that doesn't feel natural in our bones when we're angry, but a way that leads to actual change. That Jesus is inviting us into a kingdom way of life, a way that is full of grace and service and love and peace, a way that mirrors his kingdom, not my desires for revenge and retaliation. Jesus lived and invites us to live a different way, to build a different kingdom. But guys, he didn't do something that he wasn't willing to do himself. And listen to how Jesus lived, described to the Philippians. He said, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privilege. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. And listen to what happened when he was on that cross. He was insulted. We're told that the guards in charge of Jesus mocked and beat him. They hurled all sorts of insults at him, but he didn't insult back. He experienced an injustice. He was crucified, even though the ruling judge declared him innocent. And while that was happening, he literally was having his clothes taken from him. We're told that the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. He experienced injustice, but he responded with grace. And guys, he experienced inconvenience, feeling imposed upon and forced. The invading army that he called his followers to serve are the ones who oversaw his death. He was insulted, his clothes were taken, and it was a Roman officer who killed him. But listen to what happened. We're told that when the Roman officer overseeing his execution saw what had happened, he worshiped God and said, surely this man was innocent. Because Jesus didn't strike back, because he responded with grace, because Jesus served till his last breath, we're told that God elevated him to the highest place of honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus isn't building a kingdom for this world. He's not inviting us to be citizens of this world. He is building a kingdom for eternity. He's building a kingdom where violence is no more, injustice stops, and a hope can be had. So, whose kingdom are you building? Yours or Jesus's? Whose kingdom are you fighting for? Yours or Jesus's? And how you know is when you're insulted, when you experience an injustice, when you have an inconvenience forced upon you, you'll know with how you respond. And maybe we can respond a little bit less like us and a lot more like Jesus. Because who knows? Maybe that Roman soldier in front of you, in front of us, might just be introduced to Jesus because of it. Guys, we got a lot of people right now fighting their own small fights, fighting for their own small kingdoms, and not nearly enough working to show God's kingdom, which leaves us with a lot of people feeling insulted, experiencing an injustice, and feeling inconvenience. So maybe if we trusted Jesus enough to respond with grace and generosity and service, maybe, just maybe, the world might experience a little bit of God's kingdom here on earth. Let's pray. Jesus, I know when I look at my history and when I look at my heart, whenever I am experiencing injustice or insults or an inconvenience, there is nothing in me that wants to respond like you. There's nothing in me that wants to show generosity or grace or service or to be kind or to pause. That is not my natural response, God. And God, I know that is not the natural response of many of us. But Jesus, we know where that response takes us. That retaliation leads us towards regret. And Jesus, we want to respond like you. We want to respond in such a way that puts you on display, that builds your kingdom, that shows what grace and love and generosity is, that causes the Roman officers in front of us who are insulting and imposing injustices and inconveniences. We want to respond in such a way that they can only look to you and say, oh my goodness, is there a God I got to get to know? Jesus, may we truly be about building your kingdom, your way, and not ours. Give us the strength to respond more like you and less like us. Amen.